Hi, we've been talking about the ways that we are still affected by popularity and why popularity is so important. And previously, we talked about the ways that it might really be built into how our brains are set up and even how our DNA responds and is expressed. But I want to move on by talking a little bit about how popularity is affecting each and every one of us actually thousands of times a day. Specifically, we are going to talk about how your experiences with popularity when you were younger affect a lot of the ways that we think about our social experiences. But before we do that, I'd like to for you to watch this video. Just watch the video and you're going to be asked to say a little bit about what you saw in the video. So watch carefully. So, what we are going to talk about now has been studied by psychologists for many years and is referred to as social information processing. Nicky Crick and Ken Dodge were among the first of developing a model. It's really a way of taking every single social experience you have and zooming it down into super slow mode. So, if you were to try and think about all of the teeny little unconscious processes that are happening between the moment that you see something and the moment that you respond, you would divide them up into a few different steps. So, the first thing that happens is that there is an event. This could be a big event like someone breaks up with you, or it could be a teeny little event like you are walking through a crowd and someone nods at you. Very stable. It turns out that in order for us to respond to that event, there are many little steps that happen, and the first one is whether or not we encode that event. So, for instance, if you were walking through a crowd and someone nodded to you, you might not even notice it. You might be looking at somebody else, or you might be looking at your phone, answering emails. Or you might be assuming that no one is interested in looking at you, so you don't really even attend to what happens. It's very common for professors to talk about teaching in their class, and rather than noticing all over the students that are looking at them and kind of nodding, they really tend to focus on just those students that are looking down and clearly are doing Facebook while they are lecturing. And that's a really great example for QA encoding. The idea that they tend to even just notice someone thinks more than other and actually don't even see the other things in their visual field at all. Well, once we see something, once we have encoded something, and we have said that our brain has brought it to some attention to us, then we have to interpret what it's that we have seen or heard or felt. And we call that queer interpretation, and there are many different ways that we might interpret what it's that we have just encoded. And we'll talk about them more in just a second. Well, after we have interpreted something, then again, really fast unconsciously, we don't even realize that we are doing it. We then decide what is our goal. What are we hoping to achieve in this particular situation? And that becomes an important step called goal uh, clarification. Once we have a goal, we come up with a variety of possible things that we could do to respond. We select one of those responses. Again, super fast, we are not even aware we are doing it, and then we follow through on that with responses enactment. So, in other words, we decide to act out what it's that we say, that we throw rather that we wanted to do. And once we respond that often produce a new event. So, for instance, if this all started by someone nodding at you and you end up deciding to nod back, that might lead to them waving or saying hi or something like that. If you decide instead to do something rude to them, then that might lead to some sort of events where you would start a whole new cycle, and it happens again and again. Well, all of this happens based on all of our prior experiences. So every single experience that we have had socially is stored in a database, and there is actually good brain research to say that when we look at how people respond to things, it often is involving centers of our brain involved in autobiographical memory. So we are very fragile drawing upon these old experiences. Particularly as it turns out, experiences with popularity as a way to understand how every social experience happens to us very single day to day. And sometimes we think about these steps very explicitly. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, let's talk about an example where we might see this play out, and I'm going to show you three different pretend people and how they might respond to a similar event. So, for instance, imagine that someone walks by, they look at you, they smile, and they judge a little bit. Well, imagine that in the queue in codec step, the first person might look at that and say, "I just saw a person laughing at me." Okay, so they, because of their database, they really attended to their laughing. The second person might say, "I just saw a person make eye contact and smile." So they didn't really remember the laughing as much. The students show that if you ask them later, they might not even recall that happened, or they might not even notice it. But they are really noticing the eye contact and the smile. And the third person, maybe they are the kind of person that doesn't believe that anyone would ever smile at them. They have a lifetime of rejections, or feeling that they are never noticed by anybody. Their studies show less likely to even notice when people do look at them, so they might not even notice anybody. Well, the next step that would happen then is cue interpretation. So the first person might say, "I think that person was making fun of me. I saw them kind of laughing." And my automatic thought, the thing I immediately associate with that is, I think they were teasing me somehow. But maybe the second person who kind of was really noticing the eye contact and the smile might interpret that by saying, "Oh, I think maybe that person's flirting with you." And of course, the third person who didn't even see anybody would probably say, "What person? I don't even know what you are talking about." So that is the end of them. The next step would be a goal clarification. So if you believe that someone has just teased you, that person might say, "Well, in this situation, I want to assert my dominance. I really want to make sure that people don't tease me and they know that I'm not the kind of person that should really be treated that way." So maybe that is their goal. But someone else might say, "Oh, well, I'm actually scared. They tease me and I'm a little bit frightened, or I feel really embarrassed and depressed. So I'm going to go withdraw. I really want to get out of this situation." That might be a different goal. The second person who saw the exact same event as something that had to do with flirting might say, "Oh, wow, they seem pretty hot. I want to date them." So that might be their goal in that situation. So these goals that lead on a variety of possible responses, and automatically in our brains we kind of scan all these things we have done in that situation before, and we think about all the things that we might be able to do. I could scream out at them, "Oh yeah, kind of like, don't do that to me." Or I could throw something at them or something like that. While the second person who thinks, "Oh, I think I'm being flirted with, and my goal here is to try and get a date out of this," they might walk by that person and give them a smile back. They might scream out to them, "Oh yeah," or they might go ahead to them their number or say that they want to text them or something like that. So, usually after we scan all of these possible things we can do, we come up with our response. We decide, okay, person number one says, I'm going to go throw my book at them. Person number two might say, well, I've decided I should just smile at them. That's the best way to handle it. Interestingly, just because we decided on what it's that we are going to do, that doesn't mean that's actually what we do. A lot of us have really good intentions to do certain things, but when we actually go and do it, it comes out a little bit different than we expected. So, the person that decided to throw the book might decide to also scream out at the same time, take that. Whereas the second person might decide to smile back and also say something like, hey, how it's going, or something like that. So, all of these steps are happening really, really quickly. And what's interesting is that the reason why all these things occur are because of these experiences we have had before, and specifically the experiences we have had with popularity. What we have learned is that we can predict how people will encode things, how they will interpret things, and so on. What goals they'll make that responses they consider select and then act all basis on how popular they were as young kids. That creates a template, a way of us interacting with the world and affects us thousands of times a day. Sometimes we think about this very seriously and very specifically. So, for instance, imagine you have gone on the first day, there may be some of these steps, and you have debated about and ruminated about forever. What did they mean by the text, and does that mean they like me or they don't like me? And what should I do? Should I ask that back? Should I put a little emoticon, or does it seem I'm trying too hard? All of these are ways that we think about specifically about these steps and even obsess over it sometimes. And that shows us that we really are engaging in these steps. But remember, most of this time it's happening automatically without us even realizing them. So, here is an example. Before I asked you to watch a little video, the video had a box, and around the box there were three cycles of different colors. It would have been perfectly appropriate to respond to that video that what you saw were three cycles and a box. But most often of anthropomorphism, that video, we tend to see a story. But what story we see, the way that we interpret that stimulus tells us a lot of about yourselves. I have shown this video to many people over the years, and I want to give you a few examples of the ways that people will vary when they are asked to do the exact thing that I just asked you to do. Watch the video and just say what you saw. So, for instance, some people will say in a more neutral way that they saw the red cycle originally in the lead and the blue cycle followed. Then red tags green, who followed and even gained the lead. Blue was very far behind and was left out of entering the square because the door closed before he got there. For instance, another person said red and blue cycles went around the big cycle once. They stopped. They picked up the green cycle. All three cycles went around the main cycle once. Finally, red and green entered and closed the door. These are pretty neutral responses. Look how this contrasts with folks that said something that indicated maybe a low level of aggression. What they said was the blue cycle forced its way into the box, bounced around for a few seconds around the red and green cycles. Red and green ran out and closed the entrance on blue. Or the blue cycle tries to make other include him. He broke into the square and moved toward them. He threw himself against the sides of the square near where they are standing. The other cycles didn't join him. They left the square. Here is another one. Blue forced its way into the room with green and red. Blue and green bumped shoulders until green was ready to leave with red because he didn't like hanging out with blue. Let me show you one more example. Here are people that saw the exact same video, but what they said suggested even more dramatic aggression. Here is what one person said. Okay, so red and green cycle are chilling in the room. I think red is female. Blue is angry and feels left out, clearly blames green cycle for excluding it. Breaks into the room, looks like there is violence between green and blue cycles. Another person said, Blue benched on the door and forced it open. Blue is very mad, bouncing all over the place. Green faced up to blue, blue and green fought, green and red left the room and closed the door on blue. You can take a look at some of this. Here is one of my favorite. Blue busted down the box in violent narcissistic rage and then provoked Green into a fight. Green wasn't in the mood for fighting because he was happy and friends with Red. Red chilled in the corner, scared of Blue. Then Green took Red out of the box. As you can see, these different scenarios and the ways that people and describing them suggest that there are all kinds of attributions that we make. Just by seeing a simple video in which we all encoded the same information. Three cycles and the box. But the way that we interpret that is dramatically different. Some people thought that they saw cycles of different genders. They assumed that one was a male, one was a female. Some of them assumed a lot of aggression. Some thought that they were just playing. All of that has a lot to do with what it was like for us growing up and how popular we were. So, overall, hopefully, this information is showing you that popularity, in fact, really still does matter. It is mattering in a way that's affecting every single social interaction that we have as adults little by little. Our social experiences comprise a central database. We can change that database over time, but the database is overwhelmingly filled with experiences that happened when our brains became adult brains, and that was the transition of adolescence. So, the experiences we had as adolescents, which we mostly care about popularity back then, there are most important pieces of that database, which is why popularity plays a really big role at that point. That database tells us what we even see in the world around us, what we hear, how we interpret that, what goals we make, and what behaviors we think about. We select and we decide to act on. We all have biases. Whether you are very, very popular or you are very unpopular, we all have different biases. The question is, what biases do you have, and are those biases things that are helping you in life, or are they hurting you and holding you back? In the next video, I'll take a little bit about some very common biases that we see, particularly among those who had trouble with popularity. And we will talk about how those biases have affected people in adulthood.